negative energy.
And they can contain really positive energy too. It's an interesting.
Oh, I agree.
It's such an interesting topic. I know you're not. I know you're not taking that position. I understand.
Oh yeah, I'm not one of them. But I mean, I like old stuff. But a lot of people, and it's real interesting that there are a lot of stories about things like that. And in fact, I don't know if you remember, there was a great TV series. I think it was called Friday the 13th. That was about that subject, and the idea was that there were these accursed objects, and these people owned a kind of antique or curio store, and they would hear about an object, and they'd go out and get it, and then they had a repository in the back of their store that they could put these unsafe things in, and then people would be protected from them. So, and it was pretty good. They had some pretty good plots, but I imagine that some of these storylines came from some real accounts that people shared.
Right, because if you consider the possibility that everything is energy, it doesn't matter whether it's a person or an animal or a tree or a scarab or whatever it might be, and it may hold energy that's beneficial to you and it's very benevolent and it's something you work with well, or it may be something that you're not meant to have in your possession and it's meant for someone else, or maybe it's not meant for anyone at all. Maybe it needs a clearing and a blessing. Back to that topic again.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good topic, and I want to use that, if I may, to springboard into something that I mentioned when I talked about the different types of ghosts. There's one type, and this would be a ghost or a haunting, kind of spread over, but I call it the ghosts as contagion. And these are a class of ghosts or spirits that we might think of as contagious, in that they produce a sort of infectious malaise, and sometimes more than that. And you notice it, you feel it, and I can tell a story about it. In fact, a long time ago, one of my friends was house sitting a house that had one of those spirits, and you would never think of this as a haunted house. It was modern, it was beautiful. It was full of artwork. It belonged to an art professor and his wife. So we were over there visiting our friend, and at first you think, oh, this is beautiful. And then after about 5 minutes, you start to get a little edgy. After about 10 minutes, you were looking over your shoulder, and then everybody wanted to leave. And this happened to me. It happened to, I found out, like millions of people who were there. And I asked my friend later, I said, how could you stand to stay there? And he said it was very difficult, and if he hadn't promised them that he would stay, he would have done it. It was just, he felt obligated, that it was really difficult. And these kind of things, there's actually a marvelous story in literature, a classic ghost story by the English writer E.F. Benson called Caterpillars. And in it, this is a story of the narrator visits these friends at this Italian villa, and it's very beautiful and everything, but the minute he walks in the door, he senses something is wrong about the place. And it turns out that it is haunted by these awful, gross, icky, lumpy caterpillars with like crab-like claws, and they end up attacking another guest who avowed that he didn't believe in ghosts, and people who did were asses, and he was very obnoxious. And one of the caterpillar ghosts actually could be seen as a living caterpillar in one part of the story, and this guest like squashed it with his foot, and so of course you knew they were going to get him, and he ends up dying of cancer. The worms represented cancer, and also you don't want to take it as people get cancer because they're bad. That's not, the idea is that, and again, the story was written in 1912, so their idea of how cancer spread may be different than ours now, but the idea was that the negative energy was sort of attracted to this negative person rather than the other people.
Jan, I would like to take a moment to welcome a new caller online. It's Northeast Texas. Good evening, Northeast Texas.
Good evening. Interesting conversation.
Oh, great. welcome.
If you have a question or a comment, feel free.
Yes, I have a question and a comment. I have my own personal ghost story. And
will you share it?
Well, sure. But I also wanted to ask you about how you got started and how you became interested in this line of work.
Well, sir, I became interested because of my own personal experiences living in that haunted house that I described earlier in the show as a young I was like in my early 20s. And that was something, I couldn't explain it. It wasn't something I'd learned about in school, and yet it was very real, and it was pretty scary. And I also had a series of precognitive dreams that came true, names, dates, and places that, I can't explain it, but they happened. These experiences put together, I had a choice to either be afraid or to learn all I could about it, and I decided I would go for education. I would try to learn everything I could about the unexplained. So I've always been interested in anything paranormal, and in fact I wrote a column for a magazine in the 80s where I interviewed people who had any kind of paranormal experience, whether it was Bermuda Triangle, whether it was a ghost, whether it was like a urban legend, whatever it was, I interviewed them. And that was another thing that convinced me that this sort of thing it's not abnormal, it's normal. It's not paranormal or supernatural, it's natural. It's just that culturally we're not as, we're just now coming to the point that we feel free to talk about it without the fear of being, locked away.
Mm-hmm. Have you had, did you have any death in the family when you were young?
Actually, no, I didn't. And my family probably, we were as children sheltered from death, probably more than we should have been. So, no, we didn't have any dead relatives haunting the house or anything like that, or there were no family who had lived with us and then passed away.
Okay. I was just curious about that. Now to my ghost story.
Oh, great.
I was about 4 or 5 years old. I was sleeping. We slept together, the three boys. I was sleeping between my two brothers, and they were both older than me. And I looked up in the closet, and of course there's clothes hanging in there, but they looked like people. And I decided I'd be better off in the room with my mom and my stepdad. So I got up real quietly and crept into the hallway, and I perceived this glow, little kind of greenish glow, to my right and down. So I looked down to my right, and there was this little kid, a little bit older than I was, a little red-headed boy, grinning up at me. Very benevolent, very friendly, but it scared the pee-waddling crap out of me, and I proceeded to get the hell out of Dodge post-haste. And I went into my parents' room, and they wouldn't let me get into the bed with them, so I crawled underneath the bed and spent the night underneath the bed because I was afraid to go back through the hall.
Wow.
And but I figure it was probably just I was scared and my imagination ran away with me. But it was weird because it wasn't a monster type thing. It was just a little boy about my age, a little older, redheaded.
Did you ever find out if perhaps a little boy like that had lived in the house maybe at some distant time in the past?
No, I didn't. I tried to forget it, actually, put it behind me, but it was made such an impression on me. It's always stayed with me. But there was another time when I experienced what do you call it? Premonition.
Mm-hmm.
was in the lunchroom, a school lunchroom, and the principal and some teacher or something was coming down through winding their way down through the tables. And I knew which route they were going to take, and I knew what they were going to say before they did it. And that was pretty weird. I don't know what you call that.
Oh, you named it, precognition.
Yeah, but basically, about 60% don't bite, but about 40% curious. You know, and you know, we don't know what goes on. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I think, well, first of all, thank you for sharing your stories. They're great. But I agree with you. I think there are different possible explanations for many things that happen. But they've done studies on this, and I guess there's whether it's Project Blue Book or whether it's ghosts or whatever the paranormal thing may be. According to the English author Colin Wilson in his book The Occult, which is sort of a classic, he found in his research that there's a solid 15 to 18% of things that cannot be explained away, no matter what area you choose, whether you're talking about ghosts or UFOs, anything. And I found that really interesting that's consistent across the board. And it, so I think it's, maybe many things can be explained, but a lot of them can't. And I suppose I'm one of the, I was going to say, I think I'm one of the people that likes that I like that there's mystery. I like it that you can't explain everything.
And speaking of writers, I'd like to take a moment, Jan, to talk about an endorsement that you recently received from a contemporary writer of horror and ghost stories, the author F.G. Cottom, who, in reading your book, Death Be Not Loud, before even finishing the book, made the remark, "Have read sufficient of the stories to be able to say they're smart, witty, original, and unsettling. They're also up to the second contemporary. It's like Dorothy Parker has been somehow revived and given Shirley Jackson's taste for the macabre." And, of course, you can quote me. You got to love that kind of an endorsement, Jan.
I was so honored by that. Because he's one of my favorite writers. I think he writes the scariest stories today, and he does them better than anyone. I just think he's marvelous. But I thought that was so kind and generous to read my work and then to comment in the way that he did. I'm still just in awe. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome, Jan.
Jan, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Do you find that the word ghost is potentially very overused as kind of too broad a category? I don't know if you're familiar with, there had been a real interesting program for a while called Ghost Within My Child. And having watched a couple episodes of that, I don't consider them ghosts at all. My definition of ghost would be earthbound energy. It's a soul that has not yet crossed back over to home. Mm-hmm. And that's just my personal definition. And what they were actually exploring in that program was children who recalled their past lives very, very vividly. And they were able to do a lot of research and to show that they had indeed been this person before.
Yeah, I've been really interested in the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, who did a lot of pioneering research about the children with the memories from their past lives. It's just fascinating, the things that the detail and the things that they can recall. And they found some corroborating evidence, too, if I remember that correctly. Right. And it's things that smaller children or teenagers wouldn't know or hadn't ever been exposed to, which really lends a lot to the validity of it. And Carol Bowman has done a lot of writing and research in that area, too. Wow, that's very interesting. You sound like you have a wealth of knowledge, Wendy. Oh, well, you're very kind. I'm really enjoying what you're laying out.
It's an area that I think people are hungry for knowledge, and I love your points about in England that just the culture is more open to it, and we as Americans are working to catch up in a lot of ways.
Yes, in fact, when you mentioned that, it reminds me, when I was in England, I was in theological college there. I'm an Episcopal priest, retired, and one of my colleagues who was in class with me spent some years as an Anglican exorcist. She's a priest, but she works now as a parish priest, but she did. They actually, the Church of England actually has people, each diocese assigns someone to be an exorcist. Here it's not the case. What would happen here would be, for example, if I ran across something that I thought would call for exorcism, which I must tell you has happened only once in my entire career, but it does happen. But what you would do, you would go to your bishop and talk about it, and then you may or may not, you probably would proceed, but it's not in England. They already have somebody who's in charge of that because they understand that these things happen, and so they work with these situations, and I think it's really important and good because people who are in that kind of situation really need emotional and spiritual support, and they need that from, if they're a member of a church and even if they're not, if they come to you and say, I'm having this spiritual issue, we should be there for them 100%, not be turning them away going, oh, yeah, well, right.
Absolutely, or not medicating them or locking them up. I mean, I think of a shaman, but not everyone is familiar with or comfortable in working with a shaman to clear energy and to help support the person.
Oh no, I think I really believe that when it comes to spiritual support, whatever someone believes or doesn't believe, you support. I mean, as a chaplain, my training was to support that person's spirituality or lack thereof, wherever they're at. I'm there to support them. So if they wanted a rabbi, if they wanted a shaman, if they wanted whatever, part of my job would be to find that person. If not, then I would accompany them on their path however they saw it, And it's quite an honor to be able to do that. But you absolutely have to respect where someone's coming from and what will be the most helpful for them. And they'll tell you, absolutely. It's a very good point you brought up.
I have a question.
Sure.
Well, first of all, my name is Henry, and who am I? Who are we talking to here?
Oh, I'm Jan. Hi.
Jan Owen.
And the other lady is who?
Wendy.
My name is Wendy Williams.
Wendy. Okay, yeah, Wendy. Okay, and Jeff, have any of y'all heard the term genetic memory?
Yes. Epigenetics.
What do you think about that?
Tell me what you mean by it when you say when you're talking about it, so we're all on the same page.
That we inherit like memories or impressions or feelings or whatever from our ancestors, and which might come across as a past life regression type thing, or might not. I don't know. I'm just asking what you all think about it. There's scientific evidence that back up. There's been some studies and some evidence that back up the theory that memories are passed down. Some memories are passed down through the genes, physically.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think it's intriguing.
I don't know. I just thought I'd throw it out there and see what y'all think about it.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that's intriguing, and I could see how that, it's one of those things that while it might, while in some cases, some people might say, well, it's actually a past life. In some cases, that the way you describe that kind of genetic memory, that's fascinating. It could actually account for a great many cases.